In this video, I'm going to be sharing a really important topic that I wanted to kind of go over here in my Black Africa, the Economic and Cultural Basis for a Federated State book by Cheikh Anta Diop. I think it's really good that this book has a lot of really important information in regards to how the continent can be reestablished, how unifying under sensible systems of helping one another is the best way to go. And Cheikh Anta Diop really went into all of these things many years ago, and I think that it is so important to highlight how important certain things are within this book. So I'm gonna go to a section here, and this one is chapter 2. And this chapter is really nice. This one is called, I'm going to zoom in here. And this one is about linguistic history, or linguistic unity, linguistic unity. And I'm going to read through a couple of sections here just to kind of give some contrast. Being someone who is very much into linguistics and understanding African languages, highlighting African languages, having a big support for platforms and places where we can learn African languages as people within the American diaspora, why it is so important to keep these languages available for anyone to learn, and how that is definitely something that has been a fight and a struggle within the continent, trying to figure out what the national language should be so that people can understand one another, considering there are so many different languages spoken. How can people unify if they do not have an understanding under any language? And I think it is so important to understand why there is such a divide within the continent. Language is definitely a huge barrier for a lot of people, and I definitely am somebody who is very much an advocate for showcasing African languages and safekeeping them and keeping them alive and well and passing them down through history. I'm definitely going through, for myself with my ancestry, the Mande language. I am definitely safekeeping all the language manuals that I have, because I feel like it is, it is my duty. It is something that I care really deeply about, and that I want to carry down through my family, for my children and my children's children, to understand that this is a very important language, and I want them to be able to actualize over that. So it states here, number 1, choice of language on a social scale in the framework of a given territory. So it says here, let us take Senegal as an example. Before any choice could be made, the kinship of the various tongues spoken in Senegal had to be demonstrated, which may not be easily done in other territories. By setting out linguistic rules that would allow passage in a systematic way from Wolof forms to Serer, Pol to Koler, and Diola, we demonstrated the deep kinship uniting the various segments of the Senegalese population. The importance of this demonstration is that it shows us a kinship, the ignorance of which had kept alive until the present local particularities, Serer, Diola, or Toucouleur, at times as effectively uniting as many nations. Quite objectively, in a country such as Senegal, Wolof is the obvious choice for a national language, a language of government. All minorities are nearly bilingual, speaking Wolof in addition to other primary languages, or in addition to their primary language. It can be seen that within the local context, cultural languages such as Pol de Couleur fall into the class of minority groupings, whereas it is quite another matter in regions such as, say, Fouta Djallon or the Northern Cameroons. So I think it's really important to understand here how uniting under a language for each country, in order to communicate with one another, and having students in school learning a basic language of government in order to navigate through a system, is very important. I feel like if you don't have a common ground to run, a system under a language that everyone can understand, it is going to be very difficult to unify under one kind of set of fundamental foundation. I think, for example, when we're looking at the diaspora and how we're so divided when it comes to the names that we call ourselves. We call ourselves melanated, we call ourselves black, we call ourselves African, and then we shy away from uniting with each other because someone calls himself melanated and another person identifies as an African or identifies under their tribal name. And there is, a divide within all of these groups of people because no one wants to unify under a system of how can we move through in a governmental way of understanding so that we can change systems. So I think it's so important, to really be in support of African languages and assuring that in order for a foundation to be dismantled and in order for something to change, people have to unite together. And it doesn't mean that we become one person and we abandon our differences and we abandon our cultural beliefs, but having a system, language for government is definitely something that I feel like is so important for our mother continent that we all care about truly. And for myself personally, that I care about truly and understanding and trying to teach and learn, for my children and for my family. And, when I decide that I want to, visit the continent, understanding that there are really so many differences and it is based behind identities and language. So I think that it is so important to be a person within the diaspora to really support one another and stop dividing each other based on calling each other melanated, calling each other black, calling each other a Moor, calling each other whatever it is that you are. It is okay to identify yourself as who you are. But in order to unify, to break a system, we all have to unify under something. There has to be some way for everyone to stand together in order to protect what is, divinely threatened right now. So I think that, historically there has been so much separation, and this is what we see. That is why there are so many issues. Number 3 here, it states choice of language on a continental scale. So when they're talking about, state level or country basis, this kind of just talks about each country having their own language. But how can you unify the entirety of the continent? And that really kind of walks into the system of Pan-Africanism. Regardless of if the word African is in the words that are trying to be used to connect a people to get under a system of government that can protect them and themselves and their countries and their states and their, all of these subsidies of their land, how is it that we, unite one another within diasporas to protect each other? Like I said, without neglecting our differences, without feeling like somebody is trying to change our system of beliefs and our cultures and our clothing and our way of dress and our way of expressing, how can you unite the continent? A lot of people shy away from Pan-Africanism as a whole, and they feel like, I'm not an African, so I'm not going to say that I'm a Pan-Africanist because I don't believe in the word African, and it just takes away a lot of time and thinking space for people, because it's like, okay, we could spend all this time separating and getting further and further away from the point. But what is happening is so detrimental to the entire continent. There has to be some way to unite people under an understanding. So I'm going to read here, number 3 here, like I said, choice of language on a continental scale. And it states here, when our demonstrations in Wolof have gone far enough, they will have proved that in due time it will be possible appropriately to choose one of the major African tongues and promote it to the level of sole governmental and cultural language for the entire continent. It will cover all territorial languages in the same way that Russian is overlaid in the language of each socialist republic within the Soviet Union. So I think it's important to understand, even in other places, they gave an example here, even in Russia, they have a governmental language that they all speak within their union. So having a language, I've done a lot of research into understanding how Kiswahili was going to be used and not using outside languages to unify the continent if we want to rebrand ourselves back to our own. Having a language that is going to stand in a republic, union of unified people is so important to have, because if you don't have any, connective formality of understanding within people, you cannot run any system. So I think this book is very much indicative of that, and he has always been advocating for understanding why is it that we can't get one system to run the union so we all understand one another. So it states here, the choice of such language will have to be made by a competent interterritorial commission imbued with deep patriotic feeling, forswearing any hidden chauvinism. The language thus selected will at first be taught in the secondary schools of all territories, just as if it were an obligatory foreign language in the curriculum. For example, a lot of, African countries have French as their main language. And I feel like if, we're going to accept a foreign language, why can't you accept a native language that comes from your own people and try to base it off of, commonality when it comes to where the languages are already spoken anyway. Kiswahili is something that, may be spoken in eastern parts of the continent, but, understanding that at least this language comes from the continent and it's not a foreign language like French or Portuguese or other languages that have been used to create systems that we already don't understand, to objectify people to harm and to be robbed blindly because you don't understand what is being said. So I think it is so important, as someone who is very much an advocate for the continent and an advocate for the diaspora, to really read into a lot of these things. Like it states here, one might say that it makes no difference to a Wolof-speaking African whether he adopts Zulu or English or Portuguese. This is just not so. An African educated in any African language other than his own is less alienated, culturally speaking, than he is when educated in a European language which takes the place of his mother tongue. So I think it's so important, if you want to rebrand and return to a mother tongue, it is best to use what is already readily available in the language department and use it and upscale it in a way that is going to bring back the prideship that deserves to be within governmental spaces. So I think this is a really good book. I'm definitely going through this and really taking a lot of pieces and understanding that throughout history, this is something that has been an ongoing fight and we still see it today. So I think for anyone who is really wanting to understand, outside of the word black, outside of the word Africa, how can you understand this system if you separate yourself from these words? Because these words are the only way that you're going to understand the system behind it. So I think that, this is the best place to start, understanding these systems and understanding what the struggles and what the fights really have been across the continent for so many years. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please stay tuned. I will definitely be going into this topic a lot more. Like I said, I'm very much into the linguistics and sharing a lot of online databases and web forums where languages of African, origin are readily available to learn. Like I said, I'm getting into the Mende language, understanding my people's tongue, literally within my lineage. So it is definitely something that I'm passionate about and that I will be sharing here on my channel. So definitely stay tuned. Give this video 2 thumbs up and comment, like, subscribe to my channel for more DIYs, recipes, and reviews. Thank you so much for watching.